And we watched, sadly, last time, as Titus's troops stormed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. Titus himself returned to Rome, where his dad had already been made emperor. And in honor of the great victory in Judea, Vespasian, now the Emperor Vespasian, minted a series of coins. Judea capta, Judea has been captured. And with that, Judea proper was absorbed as part of the Roman Empire directly. No longer a provincial or client kingdom in any way, but in its entirety within the boundaries of the Roman world. The victory in Judea was monumentalized in Rome, not necessarily because it was so militarily incredible, but because it was militarily convenient for the family of Vespasian. He and his son Titus, and most especially his youngest son Domitian, who ruled the longest of the three members of that family, and who himself had no military victories to flaunt or brag about, found it most expedient to make an enormous fuss over the victory in Jerusalem. I don't mean to say that it wasn't a large and significant event in the history of Rome or in the history of Judea, only that the incredible monumentalization of it, as seen here in the spoils relief from the Arch of Titus in Rome, privileges it in our consciousness. There were many other revolts against the Romans in the 1st century CE in many other parts of the empire, in Britain, in Gaul, in Germany, repeatedly, and none of them receive a singular monument in the way that Judea does. The victory in Judea was very convenient for the Flavians and therefore exploited by them. Back in Jerusalem, things got quiet in a hurry. The sack of the city, the destruction of the temple, put an end to Jewish life here. The ruins just remained. And in the area of the citadel, the well-fortified, naturally high bastion that had been one of the key entry points to the city in the First Temple period and in the time of Herod himself, the citadel became the area that the army legion that had been left, or a section of the army legion that had been left in the city, inhabited. This was a small, safe place in a wrecked and abandoned city. And it was here in the citadel that the members of the Roman legion who'd been left behind to watch over the city, keep looters away, keep people who wanted to come in and try to resettle away. This is where they stayed. And the reason that we know that is because they, of course, had to do a little housekeeping in order to make it all right for them to live in order to make it comfortable. And one of the kinds of housekeeping they did was to fix the plumbing so that there could be running water. And they put piping in the citadel. And the reason we know it's their piping is because they made the pipes out of clay local to this area and stamped them with their legionary stamp. So the legion who was left behind in Rome was the 10th, Legio 10th Fretensis. The F stands for Fretensis. Their symbols were a ship and a wild boar. And you see some of their pipes here. Not all the stamps are as beautifully clear as this one. But you can see L, X, F, Legion 10th Fretensis. So it was these soldiers who stayed behind in the citadel and watched over the city. And it remained for 2 generations. I don't know what that thing is. Oh, whoops, go away. It remained for over 2 generations simply a very lightly occupied ruin. We have roof tiles, also stamped with the 10th Legion's stamp, made locally by workers who lived and traveled with the 10th Legion, ceramic workers, and they used pottery making facilities just outside the city proper to make these roof tiles. Over 2,000 roof tiles with a 10th Legion stamp have been found, and that sounds like a lot, but it's really not, because a typical small tiled roof, that is a roof of just a one-room building, takes about 700 pan tiles and about 700 cover tiles. That is, you have tiles that are flat and they have a raised edge, and then you've got a cover tile that is like a segment, like a semicircle, and it covers the sticky uppy parts of the pan tiles. And you need about 700 of both of those just for one relatively small structure. So 2,000 roof tiles suddenly doesn't sound like very much debris left over in the city. But the region as a whole thrived with the blanketing of Roman peace over the area and the cessation of internal hostilities. Most of the large cities throughout the area, including cities that had been occupied by Jews or Judeans up in the north, grew rapidly. Most of the population of the area of Judea immediately moved up north to Galilee, and the large cities on the coast and in the area across the Jordan River, in modern-day Jordan, we're doing very well. Thank you very much. So we're going to go take a look at one of those cities, the city of modern-day Gerasa, or ancient Gerasa, modern-day Jerash, to see what, in this period, in the 1st century CE, a thriving Roman city looked like. Yeah. No, they did not. The destruction by the Romans was very specific and limited only to those places where people made trouble. So there was a year-long worth of campaigning in the villages in the north, culminating in the siege and destruction of Gamla. And there were a couple towns up in the northern edges of Samaria that put up a fight, and various factions of the army were sent off to surround and make quiet. And then most of the attention settled on Jerusalem, because that's where the trouble was. And then after Jerusalem, Qumran is destroyed, and then of course Masada, where people hold up, and rebels hold up in most of the fortified Herodian palaces. Herodium, 2 flanking palaces outside of Jericho proper, and they were all hunted down, and those were destroyed. But the Romans only fought where people were fighting against them. Jerash is a large city in this region that is traditionally called the Decapolis. The Decapolis is a Latin word that just means 10 cities. It's an incorrect moniker. There's not some specific league of 10 cities, the same cities at all times. But it's a name that later on was applied by ancient historians to the Greco-Roman cities that were in this region in general. Pella one, Scythopolis, Gadara, Hippos. And Gerasa is one of the largest. So here you're looking at one of the main streets in the city, beautifully paved street. This is actually right at the intersection, and you can see from the paving stones here that there's a street that comes from one direction and one that comes from another. Get the handouts. And then colonnades, magnificent colonnades topped with Corinthian capitals lining the entire street. There were 2 theaters at Gerasa, ancient Gerasa. At the southern end of the city was one of them, and here you see it. Very sizable, handsome, Roman-style theater. By Roman-style, of course, I simply mean a theater that built up from the ground up, not nestled into a hillside. The city is mostly on flat ground, so there wouldn't have been a convenient hillside to build one on. The theater has a monumental and elaborated stage building, stone stage building, as you can see here, with both side entrances and then doors along the back of the stage building proper itself. The stage building is set up like a mini city facade with columns and doorways with little pediments on top and extends along, and you can get a sense of the scale from this person down here. It's pretty vast, and the South Theater is nestled right at the beginning of the city, right inside the South Gate. And if you would go out one of the side entrances of the stage building, or outside the side entrance of the theater itself, you would find yourself almost immediately in this enormous public space, this large forum, and you can see the colonnaded streets of the city stretching in the distance. Here is that forum. It's called the Oval Forum because it's oval. And again, you can get a fine sense of scale from the small, just tiny little people that you can see here around. So an enormous civic gathering area, certainly surrounded by shops and various public or mercantile facilities. If you walk down the main colonnaded street, in more or less the center of town is a set-apart plaza surrounded with colonnades, and in the center of the plaza, the monumental Temple of Artemis, the patron deity of the city. Again, a Roman-style temple on a high podium, front steps, a deep porch with several rows of columns before you get to the single cella of the building behind. If you keep on going down the main street towards the North Gate, you get to the second of the 2 theaters in town, the North Theater, slightly smaller than the South Theater, but also with a stone stage building. Along the road, along that main road, you pass a monumental fountain, a so-called nymphaeum. Nymphaeum is the Latin term for a public fountain. You have to imagine, for example, any of the large public fountains in the city of Rome today, or most European cities, water piped in, big pools here, a wonderful area to meet your friends, hang around, but also a public water facility. I mean, a place where it was intended for you to be able to get water, but a very beautifully elaborated one, very elegant, very, very large and impressive and noble in its ornamentation. And then eventually out the city at the North Gate, very nice single arch, monumental gate. You can see the modern town of Gerasa right behind here in the distance. The southern gate, which was the larger of the main city entrances, is a triple arch. 2 side arches, one much bigger central arch. proclaiming, advertising its Romanness, although you see that it is built in cut ashlar blocks in the typical fashion of Near Eastern construction, trimmed local limestone blocks. And when you get outside the south gate, you find yourself at the Hippodrome, the city Hippodrome, for foot races, for horse races, and there were seats. The seats are now collapsed, but these would have supported the seating that went all the way around, and there were various doorways in so that there wouldn't be unwieldy crowds. Like the theater, the Hippodrome is, as you can see easily here, built on flat ground, and so built up artificially with cut stone. It's not nestled into some natural valley or low area in the hills. It's just created in that spot. Here's a plan of Jerash. So we walked in through the south gate. We stopped for a little bit here at the South Theater, admired the stage building. Here's the Oval Forum, the huge, long, main colonnaded street, the Cardo, all the way out to the North Gate, cut at regular intervals by at 90-degree angles by other colonnaded streets. The Great Nymphaeum, the huge precinct of the Temple of Artemis, the North Theater, and the North Gate, and then the Hippodrome here. Compare this with Herod's Caesarea, and take a minute to decide what is the same and what is different. What is the same and what is different? Have a little chat. Hey, what's the same? What's the same? Donnie, tell me something that's the same. So a number of the individual sorts of buildings are the same. You have a big Roman-style temple. You have a big Roman-style temple. You have a hippodrome. Here we call it a hippodrome. Here it's called a circus. But anyway, same sort of thing. You have theaters. You have a theater. So that's the same. Iris, tell me something else. That's the same. Probably. We don't actually have the aqueducts for Jerash, but they definitely existed. So yes, public water facilities. We know that we've got the aqueduct. Actually, on this plan, it's not there, but we know it's there. Up here in the north, there was one that fed into the Nymphaeum here. So public facilities for water. That's the same. Tom, tell me something else. Entertainment was provided, public entertainment, in the hippodrome / amphitheater / theater facilities. Something else, Laura? Similar. Well, I mean, yeah. There wasn't a lot of choice about the harbor, and it's true, however, that the streets are not oriented the same as the harbor. But what about the streets? They're both at 90-degree angles. Yeah, absolutely. There's a grid plan. There's the grid plan. So that's a lot of similarities. Does anybody have another similarity? Any other similarities? There is a single main street, and probably there was a single main street in Caesarea, although we don't actually have it, but it was probably intended to be that way. And in Roman parlance, that's called the Cardo Maximus, which means big main street. But everything sounds better in Latin. Lindsay. What about them? Mm-hmm. This? Yes, there is, down here. Right. So there are big temples, and what about those temples? They're Roman in style. What else? What about them in terms of how they're situated in the city, the plan, what's around them? That's right. That's right. The Temple of Roman Augustus here at Caesarea is a temple for this section of the city. That's how it faces the harbor. It has its back to the city, unlike the temples of Artemis and Zeus at Gerasa, which are, how would you describe them? For the people in the city. For the people in the city. So that is a difference about the temples. But what's a similarity about the way that they are situated vis-a-vis other structures in the city plan? So they're oriented to other public places. Yeah? They're oriented to other public places. And around them, I mean immediately linked to them, are just other public places. So the temples are not hooked up with any other component of the city. Why is that significant? Why is that interesting? Think about this country. Think back, like to the Iron Age. There were places of worship at high places. There were. Well, but there was a temple in Jerusalem.
The way back, temples were associated with the palatial
Right. In the Iron Age in Judea and also elsewhere in the Near East, a temple is not always. Sometimes it's a standalone thing on a high place, but frequently it's a component in a system with the ruler. The ruler lives with the god. You need the ruler to get to the deity, or he's part of the architectural apparatus. And here, these temples are, as you've all noticed, standalone and oriented within various discrete architectural spaces and oriented to public places. So those are lots and lots of similarities. The components of the city are very similar. The layout, the grid system, there were gates at various parts. We don't have them, but there were gates into the walled city. There were gates into this walled city, et cetera, et cetera. What about a couple of differences? Are there any differences?
Is
No. There is in Caesarea. There's a palace. The palace is kind of smallish relative to the city, wouldn't you say? But yes, there's a palace. Yeah, that's true. I mean, in that way, Caesarea is a total show-offy thing, with the harbor especially.
Everything in Caesarea is designed to put on a show, whereas Gerasa is a lot more considerable. It's just what's happening when it functions. We notice that it's not supposed to.
Although it's pretty flat. I mean, if you stand on one of those gigantic, long colonnaded streets and look in, both directions, it's darn impressive. The Oval Forum, huge. I mean, it's enormous. It's very elaborated architecturally. It's true that there's no, there's no artificial overarching of nature in the way that the harbor is at Caesarea. But I mean, there's nothing there to be able to do that with. But in scale, it is just as impressive if you're standing on one of those streets.
I was talking about the palace, trying to show off, changing everything just so that when you're there, you would notice all this other stuff.
So what about that? What about that? This is a single integrated complex. So we have all the parts, except for the palace is absolutely unique to see. I mean, there's no palace and nothing like that here. There are civic buildings, but there's no king. But we do have, except for the palace, the same kinds of elements, but they're arranged very differently. At Gerasa, they're each arranged individually. There's individual entertainment buildings, there's religious structures, there are public facilities like the Nymphaeum, but there does not look to be some, and this I think is what you're getting at, there's not some planning intelligence integrating this into some specific spectacle for you to take away a certain message. And that is definitely what's going on here. There's all the rest of the city, and then there are the goods, the harbor, the temple, the circus, the theater, and the palace, and they are very specifically arranged. So the elements are the same, with the exception of the palace, but the arrangement is different. This is a Roman town, a Roman city. Would you call this a Roman city? Yes or no? Yes? Caesarea. Is it a Roman city? Ooh, no? What's with you guys? We just had a great big discussion about this. Hello? One more time. Roman city? Yes? Yes? Why? Let's compare it to this one. So what makes a Roman city is the constituent elements. Those of you that said yes, is that the reason? You've got the parts? Yes? Why not? You didn't raise your hand. No, behind you.
Well, they're arranged
Lucky you got out of it.
differently than in the Roman style. We've got our general Roman style with everything dispersed, whereas with Caesarea, it's kind of like it's got all the elements put in there, but it's arranged in sort of a way so you can casually look at it and be like, oh, they've got all the elements there. It's a Roman city, but it's arranged differently.
So it's the organization that makes a Roman city and not the elements. This therefore, being not a Roman city, those of you that say no, what did you say, Chelsea?
I would say no.
Because?
Organization can tell what is working.
To whom? Did the people in the city decide this?
No.
Who decided this?
Sorry.
Who decided this? Nobody. One thing got laid out after another. I mean, maybe there was a sort of the ancient Roman equivalent of a zoning board. But you've got your main drag, and all the public stuff just gets deployed around the main drag. Clearly, some space was put aside for this. In fact, this was probably already here, because as you can see, it doesn't really fit exactly in with the grid. There was probably already, I mean, this wasn't founded in the Roman period. There was a town here in the Hellenistic period. The sanctuary of Artemis probably already existed. There hasn't been excavation underneath there. We'd speculate. We don't have archaeological proof, but it's very likely. And then it was Romanized. A city grew up around it. The North Theater built, the South Theater built. There's no way that you can look at the orientations of these things and think that there was somebody, some master planner saying, now let's do it like this and we'll organize it all together. Unlike Caesarea. So maybe that's another big distinction. If you can point to one person, maybe the person who lived in the palace, as the planner and executor of the whole thing, that is not part of a Roman city, because no one person has that much power and authority and say so in a Roman city. So Roman cities are not arranged that way.
Are there no examples of, like, some periphery cities of the Roman governor kind of taking the role in organizing the city?
No. Because cities are much bigger than any one official. And because they have been around for a long time. And because governors don't build. They don't have that kind of money. Herod is in charge. He levies taxes. He gets the money. He decides what to do with the money. That's not what's going on here. Money is real. It's more like the modern American system. How do we build freeways? The mayor, the governor here doesn't say, I want to build a freeway. Taxes go, and then money comes back. And that's more the way it was with Rome. And money came back when an emperor visited, or when a governor was particularly interested in a place, made requests, saw to it. But like all empires, the Roman Empire was a place predicated on wealth extraction. That's what empires do. That's what the Assyrians did, the Babylonians, the Achaemenids, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids. That's what Herod did, and that's what Rome does. Remember when one of the things that Herod has to do as a youth is raise a whole bunch of money? One of the conspirators against Caesar had come to Syria and wanted 700 talents, and his dad allocated everybody to have to raise money. That's what they do. So the money that comes from Roman Syria in all then gets redistributed around. And some of that money went back to Jerash for various constructions. Okay. In fact, I just found this on the web the other day. Isn't this super cool? This is Rome. This is a super cool model of Rome. And Jerash is, in its own small way, similar to the idea of Rome, which is also a town that grows into a larger settlement that eventually grows into a city and has no specific plan laid down by no one mastermind, but has grown up in a convenient place, in this case along the Tiber. You see the circus, the Colosseum, public structures, a sort of central area with public structures, the Capitolium with the Temple of Jupiter, various other temples here and there. Here's the Theater of Pompey in the distance. And they're all, no element is arranged with some larger singular plan in mind, but you have all of the things that you need. And as various areas were destroyed by natural disasters, fire, for example, which took out most of the middle of this area in the time of the Emperor Nero, people would then take advantage and see to other constructions coming up. So in that way, Caesarea, you can more easily appreciate the difference at Caesarea. You have all the parts of a Roman city, but arranged according to one person's desires and for one person's purposes. And you may think that that is enough to differentiate it and not call it a Roman city. Well, Vespasian rules for 10 years. He dies. He's succeeded by his elder son Titus, who apparently a lot of people liked. Sadly, Titus doesn't live very long. After reigning for 2 years, he dies. And then his venal, horrible younger brother, Domitian, this is the head of a colossal statue of Domitian found at Ephesus, takes over. You can see the family resemblance in these fellows. And then in 96, Domitian is actually assassinated. He's succeeded for 2 years by an old guy who had been a senator, a fellow by the name of Nerva. Nerva is succeeded by Trajan, who ignores this part of the empire consistently. He campaigns. He has 2 large campaigns in the northern part of the empire. He has another big campaign in the eastern part of the empire against Parthia. And he is succeeded, that Trajan fella, is succeeded by this guy, Hadrian. As is so frequently the case when one ruler, when a ruler succeeds somebody who has had a very specific sort of profile, the next guy has a very different sort of profile. So Trajan spent almost all his time campaigning and fighting and trying to expand the borders of the Roman Empire. Hadrian does none of that, which perhaps is one of the reasons that he's constantly or very regularly shown as if he was a soldier. So here is a statue of Hadrian with this breastplate on. Always good if you don't have the credibility to pretend you do, or try to channel it. Hadrian decides to take a big tour in the year 130 to this area of the empire. He's actually very taken with Egypt, and he goes there repeatedly. But in 130, he makes a big tour of this region, Roman Syria, and some of the very nice big cities. He sails into Caesarea. He comes across and he visits Gerasa, and in recognition of the great, tremendous honor that the emperor himself has come to the city, the Gerasians, or whatever they called themselves, had either Hadrian himself gave the money for this, or the Gerasians built it so that this would be the honorific way that he entered the city. And just south of the south gate, outside the city, right next to the Hippodrome, this huge triple arch, which you may be picking up is the kind of standard lavish entryway for a Roman for a Roman city, is a big triple arch, 2 lower side arches and a very impressive tall central arch. So this magnificent thing is built at Gerasa. Hadrian tours around, and he eventually comes down to Jerusalem to pay a little visit to the 10th Legion that's here. There's this wrecked city, deserted, but extremely strategic in its location, with natural running water, an easy high point between east and west, along the main north-south highway, enormous amount of tradition. It looks like a reasonable place, in fact, a very good place to rebuild. The first thing that Hadrian does is decide to rename this whole, to take apart this section of Roman Syria and turn it into its own Roman province, which is a sector of, or had been carved out of, the Roman province of Syria. And he calls it Syria Palestina. Palestina is the Latin for Philistines. So in this way, what Hadrian does is remind everybody here of history, but a different history, a non-Judean history. And then he decides to refound the city of Jerusalem as a sort of secondary capital of this new province of Syria, Palestina. And he names it, he renames it after himself. His family name is Aelius, A-E-L-I-U-S, and he calls Jerusalem, he renames Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. Now, what does this city need to become a Roman city? What does the city need to become a Roman city? Have a little chat. What does this city need to become a Roman city? Yeah, it needs lots of things. It doesn't got too much. Name one. Needs a theater. Name something else. A public forum. Something else. A bath complex. Something else. A Roman temple. Yeah, enough of that old other stuff. Name something else. Colonnaded streets. Name something else. A hippodrome. Let's see what happens. So what have we got? A theater, a hippodrome, a forum, a temple, colonnaded streets. What did I miss? Bathhouse. One of the other, so the Roman soldiers have been living here, but otherwise nobody's living here. Who is going to live here? One of the things that happens is that Hadrian decrees that no Jews can live here. Judeans will not be allowed to move back in. Other people will live here. Because this is the site of actually not one but two rebellions. I just haven't told you about the second one, and which occurs in response to Hadrian's decision to rebuild and rename Jerusalem. Another rebellion breaks out, and it takes a few years to quell it, and it really ticks him off. So he decrees that no Judeans can live in this city. So the whole of the Western Hill has been taken up by these sporadic encampments of Roman soldiers, the 10th Legion. The city itself, of course, had been organized towards and around the Temple Mount. That ends. The Temple Mount itself is turned into a platform upon which a temple to Jupiter is built. A temple to Jupiter, the main deity of the Romans. And this coin, struck by Hadrian, reflects that. You see C-O-L, Colonia, A-E-L, Aelia, K-A-P, Cap. Colonia Aelia Capitolina. Here is the structure with its columns on the side and its little pediment. And seated inside, very, very large, obviously so large that if he stood up, he would take the roof off. So this must be a god. And he's bearded, and so it must be Zeus. So this, or Jupiter, that is to say. So here is the commemoration for this, and then the new city is organized up here at the northern end of the city. So all of the place where the history is, all of the background, City of David down here, Western Hill is just ignored. The city itself is very deliberately established in this area to the north. First of all, nobody said, but you definitely need, if you're going to have an impressive Roman city, a big entry gate. What sort of entry gate? How many arches? 3. You're looking here at the modern view of Damascus Gate, but you see this right here? This is this. One side of the new entry gate to the city. The entry was turned. So now the main way to get into the city was from the north. The north is the easiest way to get into the city. And a large, wide open gate on the easy entry side tells you that this is no longer a defended city. The main entry is not on the west where modern-day Jaffa Gate is and the Citadel. That's not built up as some large, fearsome force. The gate signals that we are inside a peaceful empire. This is a doorway, not a fortification. You might as well have welcome mat spelled out on it. So you see here, again, in view, the side of the entry gate. It's actually kind of modest. It doesn't have a lot of fancy embellishments like the south gate at Gerasa does, and you get a sense of scale from these folks. Here you can walk in and walk through it, and it's right there. And when you do, eventually you could come out here, which is also where you come out if you come through Damascus Gate. And you can see, even in this aerial view of the modern street plan of Jerusalem, the fragments of the street plan that Hadrian inaugurated. There was originally here an open area that's been filled in with shops and stuff. But here is one of the main streets, and here is the other. Because there was not one, but two. One main cardo and then a secondary cardo that followed the line of the Tyropian Valley and went alongside and below the Temple Mount, so that if you needed to get up to the Temple of Jupiter on the Temple Mount, you could. But the main cardo went to, intersected with the main Decumanus. This is the Citadel, where modern-day Jaffa Gate is. And in that enormous open space, there was one main forum, and then there was a secondary forum just north of the Temple Mount. You got your colonnaded streets here along the main cardo, shops behind, and here you are in the area of the forum. This is the area of the forum. Just ignore this, which is not there yet, but we will be getting to it. And you can see the wide open space, and even there are remnants of some of the columns that once marked the perimeter of that forum. There was a second forum that you also got to through a little, oh, I forgot to tell you that up here in this corner, there is another temple. There's a temple to Venus, the Roman equivalent of Aphrodite, and it's right here in this corner of the forum. And you have a plan, a drawing and a plan, and I think it's on that. Okay, there's the East Forum here. How do we know? Well, here's a fragment of one of the arches of the gateway of that. And here is a drawing of the other side of that central arch, and then one of the side arches as this looked in the middle of the 19th century. To see this arch today, you would go inside the convent of the Sisters of St. Anne, in whose basement the arch is. And they are very, very nice, and they love to have company. And you can go in and see the arch. Right, Emily? That's in there, right? And so here you are. And you can see the top of the middle arch coming up there. This is the arch that is the so-called Ecce Homo arch. Ecce Homo is Latin for behold the man, and it's the first two words of John 9:15, which in the Vulgate translation of the New Testament, that is to say in the Latin translation, Pontius Pilate says to the assembled throngs about Jesus, ecce homo, behold this man. He shows Jesus, this criminal, to the throng. Pontius Pilate does. And the place where the forum area itself, where he must have done that, many of the stones are still in the lower floor of the Convent of the Sisters of St. Anne. And you can go down there and see it. This is the so-called lithostratus, which means stone floor in Latin. And we know that it was a place where people congregated and hung about and wasted time, just like today, because there are even board games scratched into the stones. And this is this is one of them here. Is two board games scratched in here, and you would have had little pebbles, and this is like you can imagine how people play checkers or chess in the park, and there are those tables that are bolted in. Well, this is the equivalent of that. It's just scratched into the ground itself. So none of the entertainment buildings that you suggested are here. The Bath building, not yet. No Bath building. In fact, this is really a kind of small and modest place. You wouldn't, despite the grandiose name, Aelia Capitolina, you might not even call it a city. You might be better off calling it a town. It has gate, forum, colonnaded streets, Roman temples, 2, Venus and Jupiter, and that's it. So it's an old town that's been Romanized, but it's not yet really a Roman city with all of the accoutrements that should go along. Lindsay.
Just to clarify that, this forum area, that was built way before Hadrian.
No, all of this is from...
So then...
Oh, the arch is called the Ecce Homo arch incorrectly.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot to add that little tidbit. Yeah, that's for people who might go to Jerusalem and then see that. All the tour guides will tell you this is the spot where Pilate did this, but it's not, because it wasn't there yet. But the arch is called the Ecce Homo arch, and it's such a nice name. It's such a nice arch. It's such a nice name, and so. But I forgot that. Yes. Probably he was in the Antonia, Pontius Pilate, which is in that general vicinity, but is not that. Okay. Well, no Judeans are allowed to live in Jerusalem, but as I told you at the start of the hour, most people had moved already immediately after the Arian revolt up here to the north, into which many Judeans had already moved in the latter part of the Hasmonean period, and had been living up here. And some of the towns, there were no real cities up here, but some of the towns also sort of become Romanized in each their own way. And that would include towns in which Judeans are living, such as this town, which is called Sepphoris. And you see a view from Sepphoris here, looking out at the Jezreel Valley, the low hills of the lower Galilee. Sepphoris is located right on the edge of the Jezreel Valley, about 4 kilometers north-northwest of Nazareth, and was already a nice-sized town in the time of Jesus, although one wouldn't have called it a city at that point. But there were lots of people living here, and here are the lower floors of many of their houses. You have a plan of Sepphoris. You should have a plan of Sepphoris in front of you. And these houses are on the left-hand side of the plan. Almost all of these houses have mikvaot. Here's a plan, and all the little spots that are yellow on here are mikvaot, and you see some views of them, and you can tell from the people posed inside them that these are personal-sized mikvaot. They're not group size. This is not for party immersion. This is for individuals. And what this tells you is that the people who lived here had a very specific sense of Judaism, that elaborated on the template that we have seen already established in the 1st century BCE. For example, at sites like Gamla, where there was a neighborhood mikvah. Here now, almost every house, people have their own individual one. In the time of the revolt, Sepphoris did not suffer anything at all, because as Vespasian and his legions moved through, when they came to the town of Sepphoris, the townspeople opened the doors, opened the gates, and let the Roman soldiers in, and said, we don't have any problem with you, and whatever you want to do is fine. And so the town was not in any way damaged, and probably received a little infusion of money after the fact to build it up. And at some point after the revolt, in the latter part of the 1st century CE, this large theater was constructed overlooking the edge of town, right overlooking the edge of town. And it was constructed in a topographically reasonable spot. So it's not a Roman-style theater. It's actually a Greek-style theater, because this is the surface of the top of the site, and then it drops off here. So it has a built-up scene building, but the seats are carved into the hillside itself. It's a smallish theater as theaters go, capacity under 5,000, about 4,500 people. And it's since been reconstructed, so it actually looks a lot better than it looks here in this picture. Colonnaded streets, a grid plan, are imposed in the eastern side of the city, as you can see from your plan. Public buildings. If there is a forum, we don't have it yet. There probably was some sort of central marketplace, but we don't have it. And another aspect of Roman life, which we didn't see at Gerasa because none have been excavated. We know they must have existed. And we haven't seen at Caesarea because none have been excavated, but we know they must have existed. And we didn't see at Jerusalem because probably there weren't any, because the town was too poor. And that is very lavish personal houses. Lavish personal houses are something that the Romans pick up from the Greeks in the period of the Roman Republic, the Hellenistic period, and really run with. They love it. Interior gardens, fancy dining rooms, colonnaded courtyards, lots of mosaics. And that level of personal indulgence and flamboyance is picked up by the Jewish residents of Sepphoris in the Roman period. And this is one of the most elaborate houses that has been excavated at Sepphoris, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's a huge villa. It had a peristyle courtyard, or at least 3 sides of the peristyle courtyard, and then immediately off that courtyard was a large triclinium, a Roman-style dining room. And you see that Roman-style dining room here. Here's the peristyle of the courtyard, and here's the triclinium. And there was an elaborate mosaic floor, which you see here. And you see that this part of the mosaic floor is white. And in fact, there are even built into the mosaic floor little like this is where you put your furniture marks. So the couches of here was couch 1, couch 2, and couch 3. That's how you get 3 triclinia. And they were here so that the people on the couches would face out to the peristyle courtyard. And this gives you a sense of just how much fun it must have been to hang around here. I love these guys with their yellow shrouds. And the mosaic is phenomenal mosaic. There is a dense acanthus-leaved frieze that runs all the way around the perimeter. And at the head of the frieze, so here, well, this would have been the head of the table, here, right in the middle, there were originally a pair of portraits, but we only have left the female portrait, which you see here. This, we suppose, was the man of the house, but sadly he's gone, although she's gorgeous, so we're happy to have her. And this is just an absolutely stunning example of mosaic art. This person was rich. We don't know how this person was so rich. There's a mikveh in the lower level of the house, so this person was Jewish. Like I said, we don't know how he made his money, but he obviously had enough money that he could bring in the finest of mosaic craftsmen. So there is this exquisite portrait. She's actually called the Mona Lisa of Galilee. That's what she's called. And then around the perimeter of the central area, there are these boxes with little birds and fruit and fish and other still lifes, other little portraits, and then a procession of people carrying things, fruit and wine and towels. So they're all getting ready for a great big picnic, a great big meal outside. And then that procession surrounds a central portion that has the story of Dionysus and initiation into Dionysiac rites. So Dionysus' story is told by some of the larger panels. Here, for example, is his marriage to Ariadne. But Dionysiac rites, of course, include big parties where lots of drinking goes on. Yes? The name of the site is Sepphoris. And the name of this house is the Roman Villa. Because we don't have any evidence of the name of the person who lived here, so we can't call it after somebody's name. It was excavated in the 1980s. Excellent documentation. And, well, actually, now I think it's called the House of Dionysus, now that I think about that. And, in fact, the mosaics have been published. There's a very nice book, if anybody's interested, you could get. Mosaics of the House of Dionysus at Sepphoris. Yeah, so very good documentation. The villa was built in the latter part of the 2nd or the early part of the 3rd century CE on top of a pretty nice Herodian period house. So here's some of the events in the story. A satyr's treading grapes. Here, 3 satyrs. They are grape treaders, as they are labeled. Here is a child who's being initiated into the rites of Dionysus. He's riding a goat. He's helped along by 2 Maenad-like ladies who are labeled, misspelled, labeled in Greek, Bacchae. And that's a phonetic spelling. That's not a Greek word, actually. That's not an ending of a Greek word. They should be Bacchae. Beta Alpha, Chi Chi, Alpha Iota, but this person didn't know Greek. They could write Greek letters, but they didn't know how to spell. So they spelled it out the way it sounded to them, the person who made this. I think that's hilarious. Probably this young fella is going to be initiated into Dionysiac rites. Here's what happens if you drink too much. Here's Heracles, drunk, methe, like oh, what's an English cognate for that? Anyway, it means inebriated in Greek. And he's labeled, here's his club, just laying helplessly off to the side, and one satyr and one Maenad are helping him, and he's slumped down. That's the last panel on that side. And there are people bringing gifts, including expensive gifts, like here is a silver drinking cup, similar to this one, and a centaur. They're labeled gift bearers, dorphoroi. And then the central scene here is a is a drinking contest between Heracles and Dionysus. But we know who wins. Dionysus wins. Heracles loses. Dionysus drinks him under the table. So looking at your plan and looking at this structure, what's Roman about Sepphoris? Would you call it a Roman town? Let's see, what are we? Sepphoris, a Roman town. Lindsay.
I say no.
Because?
All of the elements that would make it a Roman town are just kind of slightly Greek. Like the theater, you think, oh, Roman, but then it's actually Greek style. And then the houses and mosaics, you're like, oh, Roman, but the writing's in Greek as well.
Well, Greek, yeah. Your point about the theater is absolutely correct. It's not a Roman-style theater. It's a Greek-style theater. It is a theater. It's Greek in its architectural style. The writing, in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, Greek was the language everybody spoke. Everybody spoke Greek. The only people who didn't speak Greek as their native tongue were the officials who were sent from Rome. So, in that way, you would say, well, Jerash wasn't a Roman town. Everybody there spoke Greek too. So Greek is just the language of the entire eastern half of the empire. Even into the Byzantine period. Michael.
Also now, because blacks, forums, and other civic structures like that, seem to have the same public functions as a Roman town has.
There were some public buildings. There's a basilica over there on the eastern half of the town in the plan you have. So far, no forum has been found. It has colonnaded streets, but we do not see the kind of, so far, large public civic apparatus that's what you're getting at and referring to. Right, we don't. We don't.
I would say yes, because it wouldn't be Roman, then you would say, all the Judean people moved up there, and the Judeans from Jerusalem were very anti-other stuff. No temples to other gods, no just Roman stuff. You don't want that here. And they do have necklaces and stuff, but it's sprawling. There are signs of Roman culture and colony streets. You said there probably was a forum, but we just haven't.
There's probably some sort of open gathering area with shops. There probably is.
So I think it was like just a very Roman building structure that just came and goes. So
In its organization, it is not planned by some single presence like Herodian Caesarea. So in that way, yeah, it's more like Jerash that way. Emily. Yes, we're going to get to the synagogue, and not today though. Yes, yeah. There's a synagogue. There's no temple. There is a synagogue. Lindsay, what else do you have to say?
I was going to ask what are the
There you go. It lacks the. It lacks it. So it's Roman in lots of its affectations, and it has a lot of parts, not in some over-organized way. Doesn't have all the parts. The only entertainment building is the theater. The theater is relatively small. It's not really clear exactly what people were watching in the theater. But as to whether there is such a thing as Romanized Judaism, you might think of it that way. Well, that will be the question we'll start with when we get to this site on Thursday, which is where everybody who lived at Sepphoris was buried. See you then.